There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Genesis. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. But it's right here at the highest point of Joseph's career where he can almost see what God is doing toward the fulfillment of his calling and the dreams that he'd been given, where these dreams just started to make sense again. And then it all comes crashing down. And he's worse off than when his brothers sold him into slavery. Because now he's a prisoner for life, which is worse than being a slave. Because how much more freedom can you be stripped of? So Joseph, he's humbled again. And all his dreams die again. But God's working, because you see, God had to move Joseph out of Potiphar's house. And God has already taught Joseph everything he needed to learn in that house. But God, He has so much more to teach him to become the man that He's calling him to be. And how would Joseph ever be released from Potiphar and be removed from Potiphar's house? Potiphar was never going to set Joseph free. Joseph was way too valuable. And if you really think about it, it's Potiphar who has the greatest loss here, because now he has to go home and he has to run his own household, and he's still stuck with his adulterous wife. And you might want to think here, well, it really didn't turn out that bad for Joseph. You know, Potiphar probably believed him, and it looks like Potiphar put a good word in for him, because now Joseph's running the whole prison. And you might want to think that, but that's not true, because that's not how it happened. And even though Joseph is innocent of all those charges, and even if Potiphar does believe him, Joseph is not only accused of rape, but he's convicted, and he's now a convicted sex offender. And it was no different then than it is today. Joseph would have been despised by everyone, even by the other prisoners. And we have some insight to what happened to Joseph in Psalm 105 in verses 17 and 18. And it says, He sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They hurt his feet with fetters and was laid in irons. And the other translation says it was bronze fetters, and that his neck was put into irons. So Joseph, he didn't start in prison at the top. And Potiphar, he didn't do Joseph any favors here. And so Joseph, he was abused by all those guards and by the prisoners. But then it says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and He gave him favor in sight of the keeper of the prison. So it was just like it was in Potiphar's house. Joseph was elevated over time. He started at the bottom again. And the keeper of the prison, he learned, just like Potiphar learned, that this was a gifted young man, and that Joseph could make his work easier because he can handle all the responsibilities well. So Joseph, he's learning again, but now it's just not how to run a large house, but it's how to manage a large institution. Because again, this is a preparation for his calling. And this is the way it is for all of God's people. They need to learn to be a servant before they can be a leader. And they need to be under authority before they can exercise authority. Because God, He is a big believer in servant leadership. And we see this all the way through the Bible. We see it here with Joseph, and then We see it again through the life of Moses, where he was out shepherding his father-in-law's sheep for 40 years. We see it in the life of David, who was also a shepherd, but then he also went through God's discipline program of hard times because he was pursued by Saul as an enemy for about 8 years before he fulfilled his calling and him becoming the king. And Jesus himself, well, he spent 30 years as a servant in training before his 3 years of ministry. And Jesus even taught his disciples in Luke 22:26, "He who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, he who governs as he who serves." And this is what God has been doing in Joseph's life. And this is what God is doing in our lives. And we can see here that Joseph, even with all these trials, that he clings to the Lord because he believes in the Lord, no matter what his circumstances are. And really, if you look at it, where else does Joseph have to go? And if you look at it again, and you look at your own circumstances, where else do we have to go? We could go back to the world, but there's nothing there. To the drinking or to drugs or to whatever your rebellion was. But they'll never deliver us from anything. They'll never give us a future. They can only lead us into a deeper bondage. And then this chapter ends with, "The Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper." And so here, we need to learn that as believers, that the Lord, he is also with us. And he doesn't always deliver us from our circumstances, but he's always with us in our circumstances. In fact, in many cases, he actually placed us into those circumstances because he's using them to teach us and to train us to be the persons of character that he's created us to be for his calling in our lives. And we may not see God leading us, and we might be blind to it, but he's putting things into us. And we're learning from all the trials and all the troubles that we go through. And the truth is, they take time. Because just like here, it seems like nothing is happening, but the things that he's doing, you're going to need those things for later. Joseph doesn't know he's going to need these things for later. But you see, God, he sees our future. We don't see it. But our future, it's a grand future, and it's a great future. And it could be things that God had already placed into your hearts. But we also see here that Joseph, he didn't sit around and he didn't dwell in self-pity. He trusted God in spite of his circumstances. And we see Joseph here that he's speaking to everyone he meets about God, to everybody that he encounters. But this walk that Joseph has with God, he walks with God alone. He doesn't have anyone to walk with him. And he accepts every one of his circumstances as if they are from God, no matter what the people have ever done to him. And you can see how he had a hard childhood and he was abused, but that didn't stop him from trusting God. He allowed God to teach him through all those things. And some of those things he learned, he could have learned no other way. So you may have had a hard childhood and you may have been abused, but that's no reason to stop trusting God. You might have a job you hate, and you might have been there for a long time, but God can be with you in that job, and he can prosper you. And he has the power to remove you from that job when his work in you from that job is finished. And God, he can deliver you from temptation. If your life is committed to him, he can help you stand even when you've been falsely accused, and he can keep you from sin. When you are a Christian and your life is in him, you can trust him, and you should. And you can receive all your circumstances as if they've been given to you from him personally. And you can know that he loves you and that he always has your best in mind, even if it's hard, even if you've been wronged, even if it takes a long time, and even when you can't see what he's doing. But if you're not a Christian, and if you don't believe, and you don't have a relationship with him, this doesn't apply to you. But if you give your life to Christ, God will make sense of all your past, and he will give you a future that nobody can take away from you. And if that's your need today, we can take care of that today. So if anybody here needs prayer for anything, just come. We'd be glad to pray with you. So when we last left Joseph, he was running the prison, but he was running it as a prisoner. So Joseph is what we would call nowadays a trustee, which is a prisoner with a job. And it was probably like it is today. If you are a trustee, you are probably allowed a few extra privileges. Maybe better food, maybe more food, or a different robe to distinguish you from the other prisoners, which would give you more access to other places within the prison. And it's always better to have a job in the prison than to do nothing, because prison days are long days. And if Joseph was only to look at his circumstances, as far as he would know that this would be for the rest of his life. Because Joseph, he didn't have any promises from God, as far as we know, for being released from the prison. He only had those 2 dreams that someday his family would come and bow before him. And so as a high-level trustee, Joseph, he has access to the prison where the white-collar criminals were kept. And these high-profile criminals, they were from Pharaoh's house. This is from his royal court, Pharaoh's very own cabinet members. And these 2 prisoners, they haven't been sentenced yet. And so this is where these 2 men from Pharaoh's house would have waited for their day in court, which would be before the Pharaoh. And they would have probably had it a little better than the general population. And the reason is because you really wouldn't want to offend anybody that might be restored back to power. And Joseph, he would have known how to serve these 2 men and to make their stay comfortable, because he has that kind of experience back from Potiphar's house. And that's what he was trained to do, to serve officials without being offensive. And so we're told that these white-collar criminals were the chief butler and the chief baker. And the place of confinement that they were kept was called the house of the captain of the guard. And we know who this is, because we read about him last week. He's no other than our good old friend, Potiphar. Potiphar is the captain of the guard. And so it appears that Potiphar, he really didn't believe his wife about Joseph's attempted rape, and he's moved him over to his area of the prison, because last week we saw that Joseph, he was serving the keeper of the prison, but he's not there any longer. Now he's working for his old boss, Potiphar. And these 2 men, the butler and the baker, it says that they weren't kept in prison for a short time. It says that they had been there for a while. And so Potiphar, he put Joseph in charge of serving them. And we know that the chief butler, that his position would have also been known as the king's cupbearer. And he would have been the one that was in charge and responsible for Pharaoh's wine. And we know a little bit about cupbearers from the book of Nehemiah, because Nehemiah, he was the cupbearer to the king Artaxerxes.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.